March 12, 1945. A dry, wind-cut morning in central Texas. The barbed wire of Camp Hearn shimmered under the rising sun, the same way it had every morning for the past 3 years. Inside the fences, over 1,000 German prisoners stirred from sleep, their khaki uniforms creased, their boots heavy with yesterday's dust. Among them was one woman, a name that barely appeared in U.S. Army records, scribbled in faint pencil. Liesel Hartmann, Bremen-born, age 24. She had been captured in France while serving as a medical aide attached to a Wehrmacht supply unit. A rare female prisoner among thousands of men. The U.S. military, unsure what to do with her, sent her with the rest. And so, she found herself half a world away, brushing flies off horses under the blistering Texas sky. That morning, something unexpected happened. Corporal Jack Turner, a young guard from Waco with a cowboy's drawl and dust permanently on his boots, came to check on the stables. He was lean, polite, and quiet, the kind of man who could lift a saddle with one hand and quote scripture with the other. He saw her struggling to tighten a girth strap and said, "You ever been on one of these, miss?" His tone wasn't mocking. It was genuine curiosity. She shook her head, wary. For months, she had lived by one rule: never assume kindness meant safety. Turner gestured toward the mare, a brown quarter horse named Daisy, and smiled. "Then you ought to try it. She don't judge uniforms." At first, she thought it was a cruel joke. A prisoner, allowed to ride? It was absurd. But when Turner opened the gate, unlatched the rope, and offered her his hand, she realized he meant it. Her pulse quickened. A dozen other prisoners nearby stopped working, watching in silence. The guard tower didn't intervene. There was something disarming about the scene. A German nurse, a Texan soldier, and a horse between them, all framed by fences meant to keep people apart. The leather reins were warm under her palms. She mounted awkwardly, the horse shifting beneath her weight. Turner adjusted the stirrups, his movement slow, respectful. "Easy now," he said softly. "Just breathe with her." The mare stepped forward, and for the first time in years, Liesel felt motion that wasn't forced. Not marching, not fleeing, not obeying, but movement that belonged to her. Those who witnessed it said the camp grew strangely quiet. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The sight of an enemy riding an American horse was almost too much for the rules of war to contain. One guard reportedly muttered, "Well, hell, guess peace got here early." What happened that day didn't change the outcome of the war, but it changed the temperature of the air inside that camp. It proved something neither side had wanted to admit, that decency could survive even here. Camp Hearn, one of over 500 POW camps scattered across the United States, was meant to hold the enemy at arm's length. But by 1945, its fences had become strangely porous, not physically, but morally. The prisoners, most of them farm boys from Germany, picked cotton, mended fences, even played soccer matches against local Texans. They were well-fed, sometimes too well, compared to the ration-starved civilians back home. Americans would joke that the Germans were getting fat in captivity. Yet beneath that irony was something deeper. The U.S. Army had kept its word under the Geneva Convention, and that gesture of fairness became its own quiet propaganda. Turner never said why he offered her that horse. Some said he missed the company of people who didn't talk about the front lines. Others believed he simply saw someone tired of being reduced to a label. Whatever the reason, the act traveled to the camp like a rumor wrapped in sunlight. That afternoon, after the ride, Liesel stayed behind to brush Daisy. She ran her fingers through the mare's mane, whispering in German, something the horse couldn't understand but seemed to feel. Turner lingered at the gate, pretending to check a feed ledger. "You ride like you belong here," he said. She turned, surprised, unsure whether to thank him or cry. Later that night, in the barracks, she wrote her first diary entry in months. "Today I was not a prisoner. For a little while, I was only a woman on a horse. Maybe that is what freedom feels like." By evening, the sun bled into the horizon, turning the barbed wire into ribbons of gold. Somewhere beyond those fences, the war still roared. Towns burned, families fled, soldiers bled into the mud of Europe. But in that small, forgotten corner of Texas, Two strangers share a moment so fragile it could barely survive history. Liesel handed back the reins, her hands trembling. Turner nodded, tipped his hat, and said nothing. The silence that followed was not awkward, but reverent, like both understood that they had crossed a line, not of rules, but of understanding. In the camp's daily log, the date was recorded without incident. Nothing unusual happened, officially. But unofficially, that morning became legend. The day a German prisoner rode free, and a Texan soldier remembered that humanity was bigger than war. By the time spring melted into the long heat of 1946, the fences at Camp Hearn were coming down plank by plank. The war was over, and America was restless to move on. Soldiers were returning home. Ration books were vanishing from kitchen drawers, and German prisoners, thousands of them, were quietly being loaded onto buses bound for the sea. Their faces were thin, their English a little better than when they'd arrived, and their hearts tangled between guilt and gratitude. Among them was Liesel Hartmann. She packed a few things she owned: a folded blouse, a photograph torn from a Red Cross bulletin, and a small leather pouch given her a month earlier by Corporal Jack Turner. Inside was a short note in his uneven handwriting. "Ride free when you can. Don't look back." She carried it like a relic, the ink already fading, the words still breathing. The morning she left Texas, a pale dawn lit the prairie in streaks of gold and lavender. The buses rumbled to life, kicking up the red dust she'd come to recognize as home. As they passed the edge of the camp, she turned her head to the horizon. For a moment, she could almost see the outline of a horse and the silhouette of a man tipping his hat. She smiled through the glass, not because she was happy, but because she finally understood what that day had meant. When she stepped off the ship in Bremerhaven months later, the air smelled of smoke and salt and ruin. Bremen was no longer the city she'd left. Streets were crushed into bricks, windows shattered, cathedrals hollowed. The people who remained walked like ghosts. Her childhood home was gone, reduced to dust by Allied bombers. She was alive, yes, but she had returned to a graveyard. She took work where she could, mostly in a hospital tending to wounded men younger than she was. At night, she wrote letters she never sent. One of them, found decades later in a trunk, read, "Texas gave me something Germany has forgotten: gentleness." I think of that horse, of that sky, of that man who spoke softly even when he had every reason not to. Thousands of German POWs who had worked American soil shared a similar disorientation upon returning home. They were seen not as heroes, but as reminders of defeat. Some were questioned for speaking fondly of the enemy. They described being treated humanely, even kindly, and it sounded like betrayal. The irony was bitter. The captives had tasted freedom, while the free struggled to rebuild their broken country. Back in Texas, life returned to its rhythm of church bells and cattle drives. Jack Turner came home from the service with a quieter soul. His mother noticed it immediately. The way he paused at sunrise, the way he spoke slower, more thoughtful. When a neighbor asked him about the war, he said only, "I didn't see much fighting, but I did see decency." He kept Daisy, the same mare Liesel once rode, until the horse's dying day. Some evenings, he would ride out past the old campgrounds, where nothing remained but fence posts and grass. Locals thought he was just keeping watch over his land. He knew he was visiting a memory. Years passed. Letters crossed the Atlantic in fits and starts, though few survived. One came from Bremen in 1949, written in neat script. "If you ever ride again, think of me. I am trying to find what you already knew, that freedom is not a country, but a way of being." No one knows if it ever reached him. By the 1960s, the story of Camp Hearn had nearly vanished, replaced by new wars, new fears. Yet every so often, an old farmer would point to the empty fields and say, "Right there, son, a German gal once rode a horse inside them fences. A guard let her. Guess he figured she needed a little sky." People laugh, but the tale never died. It became a quiet legend, not of rebellion, but of grace. In 1988, a historian collecting oral histories from POW camps uncovered Liesel's name on a faded prisoner roster, Hartmann L. Next to her assignment, in smudged pencil, it read Stables. That one word reopened the story. Through fragments of letters and testimony, the historian pieced together what had happened. It was simple, almost absurdly so, one act of kindness in a world collapsing under cruelty. And yet it endured. Today, the land where Camp Hearn once stood is peaceful pasture. Cattle graze where barracks once stood. The wind carries no trace of orders shouted in two languages. A modest stone marker by the roadside reads, "Here, between 1943 and 1946, prisoners of war were held. Humanity prevailed." If you stand there long enough, as the sun sinks over plains, you can almost hear the rhythm of hooves and the laughter of a young woman tasting freedom for the first time. That sound, faint but certain, belongs not to Texas or Germany, but to something larger, the stubborn, enduring heart of forgiveness. And perhaps in that endless Texan sky, two souls still meet. The German prisoner who found freedom on a saddle, and the cowboy who believed even war couldn't fence in compassion.